The 60s were a memorable time for the city of Houston. What made them so memorable depends on who you ask. Some will immediately recall 1962, when the groundbreaking ceremony for the Astrodome was done with guns instead of shovels in true Texas fashion. Or 1969, when Houston was the first word spoken to Earth from the moon. But then some will recall 1965, the year the Astrodome opened, the year the Beatles came to town, the year that Houston was rattled by the bloodiest homicide in that city's recorded history. In 1965, the Montrose district was home to Fred and Edwina Rogers, an elderly couple who had lived in Houston for 30 years. 81-year-old Fred was a retired real estate salesman, and 79-year-old Edwina sold Stanley home products at home gatherings similar to Tupperware parties. After missing a meeting on Monday, June 21st, her employer, Hazel Keedy, became concerned, especially since Edwina was at a meeting all the way in Austin just a week before. She made several attempts to get a hold of Edwina with no luck. On Wednesday, the 23rd, she reached out to family members, which prompted Marvin Martin, the 56-year-old nephew of the Rogers, to take a trip from his home in Channelview to check on them. Upon arriving, he found the house locked up all the way around. He then decided to summon police and request a welfare check on his aunt and uncle, explaining the circumstances. Two officers, Bullock and Barla, went with Martin and conducted a similar check, confirming the doors and windows were all secure and the blinds were drawn. Then, based on the concerns expressed by Martin, they decided to force their way into the home. During their search, the officers found something of a mess, but Martin indicated that his aunt wasn't much of a housekeeper and focused her energy on her job, which could explain the state of the home. At some point, Officer Bullock opened the refrigerator. When he did, the welfare check became the scene of a full-on investigation. In the refrigerator, Bullock found chopped up human remains on the shelves and two human heads in a sack in the vegetable drawer. Martin was able to identify the heads as those of his aunt and uncle. The scene was then of course taken over by detectives. They found that Edwina's head was badly bruised, indicating she had been beaten before she was killed. Fred's head was minus the eyes as they had been gouged out. Both bodies were without entrails and their sexual organs had been mutilated. A claw hammer and a straight razor were found with blood on them, and a keyhole saw was found with bits of human flesh. There was also a plastic blood-spattered raincoat believed by detectives to have been worn by the killer during the slaying. As the detectives sorted through the crime scene, they started with an obvious first point of contact, Marvin Martin, as Marvin was already on hand. He immediately addressed the absence of his cousin, Charles F. Rogers, the elderly couple's son who lived in the house with them. Martin described his cousin as a hermit, a recluse. Martin said he had visited his aunt and uncle occasionally, even as recently as 2 weeks prior, but his cousin was never around. He went on to say that Charles rarely even interacted with his own parents, despite living in the same home. He told authorities his aunt and uncle had told him that her son would usually leave the house before Fred and Edwina would wake up and return home after they had gone to bed. When he was home, he lived entirely upstairs, even cooking his meals on a hot plate in his own room. He further stated that in 10 years he had only seen his cousin Charles twice, the most recent being a year prior when he saw him downtown but was completely ignored when Martin approached him. Also that in some cases, when relatives would contact the couple, they would ask the relatives if they had heard anything new about Charles instead of the other way around. When neighbors of the couple were questioned about any details they might know of Charles, one neighbor could only say that they would see him walking in the street sometimes, but knew nothing of him. Another neighbor, who lived right next door to the Rogers for 7 years, was actually surprised to hear that the Rogers even had a son. Apparently, Mrs. Rogers had recently told a delivery driver she hadn't seen her son in a year. The next few days saw the unveiling of more details in the case. Edwina's head had a bullet in it. There were traces of blood in the downstairs bathroom and on the stairs leading up and into Charles' bedroom. Tests confirmed that much of the house was thoroughly scrubbed, assumed to be an attempt to clean up the crime scene. The police soon got calls from residents in the neighborhood complaining of a strong odor coming from the sewer line. When the sewers were checked, human entrails were found. The significance of who did this was now being matched by the significance of where is Charles F. Rogers. Detectives now needed to get as much information on him as they could. In his room, they found an honorable discharge from the U.S. Navy and an assortment of musical instruments. The discharge showed that he was a radio and electronics technician. Further investigation determined that he attended Texas A&M for about a month in 1942 and went on to earn a Bachelor of Science degree majoring in physics from the University of Houston. His last documented job was working as a seismologist for the Shell Oil Company, a job he did before as well as after he served in World War II. According to Shell, he resigned from his job in 1957, giving no reason for the departure. They also found an expired ham radio operator's license and a commercial pilot's license for a single-engine aircraft. Detectives confirmed at Hull Field in Sugar Land that Rogers used to rent small planes and fly them to other cities within a 200-mile radius. Most recently, 18 months prior to this investigation, Rogers made more than one trip to Austin. Don Hull, the owner of Hull Field, said Rogers told him he was selling water purification equipment, but detectives checked all the firms that sold such equipment, and none of them had any information connecting to Rogers. Police were also contacted by Annie Mae Green from Conroe, Texas, a colleague of Edwina's. She reported that she telephoned Edwina on Wednesday morning and was answered by a young male voice who said Edwina was not home and simply hung up. She stated that this was not out of the ordinary, as she was often answered by a younger male when calling Edwina, and this voice sounded like the same one. Being that her call was placed at 9 a.m., 12 hours before the bodies were found, and based on the autopsy that determined the couple had been killed days before the discovery, this meant that whoever answered the phone that morning was in the house after the couple was slain. For the next couple of days, Rogers' photo was on the front page indicating he was wanted for questioning. Then, on July 9th, it was reported that Charles had been found. According to reports, he was arrested in Huntsville on a charge of disturbing the peace. During his court proceedings, a patrolman, Alvin Hoke, who knew the family, walked into the courtroom and immediately spoke up, saying this was the man everyone was looking for. A former prison guard, Curtis Oliphant, who Rogers lived with for 3 years while attending college, also came forward that day and confirmed the man in question was Charles Rogers. The reports gave very little on his connection to the crime, only that he had been detained, which possibly offered some relief to a community who was on edge as they followed the details of this case. That relief didn't last very long, however, as that same day, news reports came out that the man who had been held and identified as Charles Rogers turned out not to be. Reports say that William C. Hughes Jr. went along with those who identified him as Rogers, but when he was to be interviewed by news reporters about the killing of his parents, he then denied it and provided his true identity. Detectives were quick to dismiss his initial claims, since his description did not match that of Rogers in any way. A fingerprint check solidified the fact that this was not their man. The last time Rogers was discussed in a legal capacity was in 1975 when he was declared legally dead. The house on Driscoll was demolished and the lot sat empty until a condo was built in the year 2000. That was really as far as this case was taken by the Houston Police Department. However, there are some very intriguing theories surrounding this case. In 2003, Hugh and Martha Gardenier released their book, The Icebox Murders, in which they break down their theory with regards to Charles' connection to the murder, as well as what may have happened to him after he disappeared. Author John R. Craig published a book in 1992 entitled The Man on the Grassy Knoll, in which he indicates proof that Rogers not only was involved in the assassination of JFK, but can place Rogers at the scene of the event. Some say that his connection to the CIA, and specifically the historic assassination, has plenty to do with why he was never found. Some theories even suggest that the killing of his parents was due to them learning too much about his involvement, or even that the investigation wasn't done as well as it should have or could have because of a connection to a covert world that we're not supposed to see. Some theories say that his father Fred was connected to bookies as well as the mob. Evidently, there's so much more to this story that you can find on microfilm. But CIA connection? JFK assassination? Mob ties? You wouldn't want to hear about all that, would you?